Hello and welcome to Hexed Encountered. My name is Joe. Today I'm going to be doing a playthrough of the first training scenario number 1, Where Did They Go? From Band of Brothers Old Breed South Pacific. This game is from Worthington Publishing and is designed by Dean Halley and Jim Krohn. And this game is Pacific Theater, South Pacific, as you might guess from the name, squad level, tactical combat. As I'm doing this is a fairly new release, and so the plan is to do maybe both training scenarios and then something from, one of the many scenarios that are in the scenario book. I did do a first look at this game, so I would suggest if you have not watched that, you go take a look at it because there is some information in there that I may not cover as I do this playthrough. This is a very simple and straightforward scenario. So I will take some time to explain some things because this will be the only thing I'm doing. And as I mentioned, this is a fairly simple and straightforward scenario. Infantry only, no mortars, no artillery, no tanks, none of that stuff. No artillery, no planes, nothing. So this is a 5-turn scenario. And the description is here: at the mouth of the Mantanacao River, Guadalcanal, August 9th, 1942. The outgunned Japanese garrison at the airfield abandoned it on August 8th with plans to regroup in the hills west of the Mantanacao River 5 miles away. But only 430 of them managed to arrive at the mouth of the river, where they dug in to await reinforcements. The remainder got lost in the jungle, where they died from starvation or were captured by the Marines. This allowed the Marines to occupy the airfield without a fight. They christened it Henderson Field after a Marine pilot who had died during the Battle of Midway. And they sent out patrols on August 9th to find out where the enemy had gone. One of those patrols found the Japanese the hard way as it crossed the sandbar at the Mantanacao River. The historical result: the Marines were fired on when they were crossing the sandbar. The Marines in the patrol had accomplished their mission at that point and returned to Henderson Field to report what they'd found. So, special rules: hexes numbered 4 or less in rows I through O are out of play. The river is deep and can only be crossed or entered at the sandbar. There are no hills or paths for simplicity. We need to know the terrain rules for open ground and jungle. So, like I said, very, very basic, simple stuff. Okay, the Japanese set up first. I actually have it all set up underneath this right now. The U.S. will move first. Victory points: the Americans will win if they have more squads west of the Mantanacao River sandbar than the Japanese do. Okay, so down here you can see the at start units. Let me slide this guy up a little bit so we can see the whole thing. So at start, this is the Americans. They set up east of the river 4 of the 1942 squads, 2 machine gun weapons teams. So the game has squads of various quality. So this is early war U.S. Marine Corps rifle squads and 2 early war machine gun weapons teams. So these would be like the M1917 Browning machine gun, water-cooled, big old heavy thing that they used at Guadalcanal. And then the Japanese, who set up west of the river, they have 2 first-line squads, which are better quality, and 2 second-line squads, which are slightly less quality, and 1 decoy. Now we'll talk about decoys in a little bit. Now you see here operations range. If you're familiar with Band of Brothers, all this stuff is old hat. If you're not, the operations range will tell you a minimum and a maximum of basically activations that you can do within a turn. So, or orders that you can give, I guess. It doesn't really matter. You'll see as we play. But the Americans have a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 4. So they can activate. They have to activate 2. They cannot activate more than 4. Japanese, on the other hand, they only have 2. So they have to activate 2 and can't activate any less or any more. They each get a command point, and I'll talk about that too in a little bit. And the route edge is the eastern edge of the map, and for the Americans, and the west for the Japanese. So, as you can see here, I basically lined this up to where this is the box. This line here is hex 4. So it's and this is row I here. So this is like basically a little bit more than a quarter of the total map. And I turned it, north is this way. So normally I would have it turned the other way so that the river's running north-south or up-down here on the shot. But in this game, unlike the European games, you have facing. It's mandatory here, optional for Europe. So you have to kind of, and that got messed up a little bit. You have to point your units at a spine. So these rifle squads are facing this way because this is the spine they're on. So anything along this line, as far as these two squads, this is front. Anything behind that line would be flank. That's important. Not so much in this scenario, but it'll be important later on when we get into other things. Let me move this in here as well. And I think I'll slide this over a little bit more so that we get something a little more interesting to look at than my table. There. Okay. So real quick, I don't think I went through this in my first look, but we can talk about it real quick. So this is obviously a counter. This is a 1942 U.S. Marine Corps rifle squad. You can see the red stripe at the top. That's something new. That is a company designation because there is a campaign where you can link scenarios together that uses companies and tracks fatigue and things. And we may get into that down the road in the series. I'll see how things go, what kind of, what the audience reaction is. I try to kind of, let the people speak, so to speak, on what works and what doesn't. So down here we have the, I lost my focus there. Down at the bottom left, you see the 4/3. The 4 is regular firepower. The 3 is proficient firepower. There is a difference. I will explain that as we play. The number 5 in the middle there is their range. They can fire, they get their full firepower or full proficient firepower at up to 5 hexes. They can go out to 10, but it would be halved and rounded down. So that would be a 2 and a 1, basically. The 4/8, those are casualties for getting reduced. All rifle squads can be reduced, and that's the reduced side. Then you see the 3 numbers on the right. Those are the morale numbers. 10, full morale. 6, suppressed, lightly suppressed morale. And 2, fully suppressed morale. Basically, one of the key components of this particular system is that when you give an order to a unit, it might have to take a morale check, depending on if it's been under fire and has been suppressed or fully suppressed. And then you would need to roll under those numbers to for the unit to actually carry out your order. So that is a key piece of this particular system. All right, so we are ready to begin. The U.S. goes first, as I mentioned. We have at least 2 units we need to use, and we can use up to 4. And once you use a unit, there's a used marker, this guy, and you stick the used marker on it to indicate that it has been used. The Japanese, they have 1 decoy. They have 2 first-line squads, 2 second-line squads. As they get revealed, I'll show what they are, just to kind of keep things moving a little bit. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to fire. These are my weapons teams. They're in concealment. Why are they in concealment? I should talk about that as well. If they are in beneficial terrain or out of line of sight of the enemy, they are concealed. The U.S. is conceal -1. The Japanese can be conceal -2. The rulebooks say when they enter play, they get a conceal -2. So I may be doing this wrong, and they're supposed to be -2 at setup. It doesn't specifically say that, so I'm playing it that applies more to people who come into the battlefield afterwards. That could be totally wrong, and I'm sure if it is, somebody will tell me. But that's just how I'm going to play it. And since this is a tutorial scenario, doesn't matter a whole lot. I'm sure I'll have it figured out one way or the other by the time I get into the real scenarios. Once you do an action, you remove concealment. So we're going to remove this conceal because this guy here this is a machine gun weapons team. They're going to fire. Now you have to have line of sight, and this is jungle terrain. These dotted lines are paths. There are no paths. This is a hill. There are no hills in this scenario. So we ignore elevation, and we ignore paths in this particular scenario. In future scenarios, this kind of stuff would come into play, but not for this one. So they're going to shoot at this guy right here, and there are dots, as you can see, and you just trace along the line of the dots between here and the target. Now, if we go here to the center of that target, we scrape by with line of sight. So we're going to fire, or I could just play it safe and say I'm going to fire there, because they definitely have line of sight to that one. So let's do that. Let's just do that. This way I don't have to get out a string or a little laser or something to kind of point. We're just going to go right here. So they're full. They get to fire with full firepower because they're not reacting, and they haven't moved and everything. So they get to, this is a planned shot essentially. So they're going to be full firepower. So that's a 7. Their range is 14. Range to that target is only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 hexes, no problem, full firepower, full range. Now, they get -2 for the jungle terrain. Jungle's good cover, -2. So you take 2 from the 7, becomes a 5. Then you take an additional 1 from the 5 for the concealment, and you're down to a 4. So now you know you're firing here. You have to roll a 4 or less. It's a 10-sided die. So if I roll a 4 or less, we would be suppressing them. And then depending on their damage rating down here, the US has a 4. If you can subtract that number from your roll. So if I rolled, say, a 1, and their damage is a 3, they would take full suppression and a casualty. So let's roll. And we rolled a 5, so that's nothing. So I'm going to drop a used on here. And then I'm going to remove the concealment from this guy, and I'm going to do the same thing. And this time I'll shoot at this guy. So the range is a little further. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Still in range. Same exact calculation. So we need a 4 or less. I'm not going to use that one. It didn't go through the tower. And we get a 4. All right. So that now, if we look here, it's a 3. So they're going to keep their concealment, but they are going to get a suppression marker, because we still don't know exactly what's in there, but we've suppressed them. Now, if that had been a 1, we would have suppressed and fully suppressed them, which is the flip side, which is this guy here. And that also has the potential to make them take a casualty, if I remember correctly. So we drop a used on our other weapons team. We've now used our 2. We can stop, but we have 5 turns. This is a 5-turn scenario. I didn't actually even put the turn marker out. But so on the scenario page here at the top, you see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's going to be off camera, but we are on turn number 5, and we're going to count down, or I guess I'll start at 1. We'll start at 1. We're in turn 1 and counting up. So once we do both sides and go through all the phases, then we will go to, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5. Pretty straightforward. So they're both used. This should be over here. I don't know how I had the stacking limits too. I don't know why they were. Perhaps when I turned the board, they slid over, or so. I don't know. Anyway, here's the thing. To win the scenario, the Americans have to get more units across. They have to get more units over here than the Japanese do. The Japanese have 4 units. The Americans also have 4 units. So not only do we have to get all 4 of our units, in theory, across the river, we have to kill at least 1 unit on the Japanese side to win. So even though this is a bad move because you're going to be moving in the open, and that has a penalty, we're going to do it anyway. So we're going, because we have to, basically. So we're going to go 1, and now we are susceptible to opportunity fire, and there are 3 different kinds of opportunity fire in this game. So this would be the first kind, which is kind of regular opportunity fire. Then there's also planned opportunity fire, and then there's final opportunity fire, and we'll get into that in a bit. So basically, you get benefits based on how close the unit is if it's in open terrain. So this guy, by moving here, is now only 1, 2, 3 hexes from this unit, and 4 from this unit, and 4 from this unit. This guy might not have line of sight yet, but when he gets here, he would. The thing is, though, if you use up your units, if you make them use, because when you do op fire and complete it, then you're used, basically. So he's going to move here. The Japanese can elect to opportunity fire. So let's see, what do we have here? That is a unit. So we're going to have this guy opportunity fire. So he's going to fire. Now you see his full firepower is a 5. Let me pick this up so you get a better look. So this is a first line unit. So he's got a full firepower of 5, a proficient firepower of 3. The subscript 3, that is their melee firepower, which the Marines don't have one. They get their full firepower. The 5 is the range, and then 3 and 7 for damage, and then you see at the top 10, 7, and 4, and you see that little S there? That is Saishin, which is like fighting spirit, and it lets them do some things that I'm probably not going to apply in this game because, like I said, this is just kind of a tutorial, keep it simple kind of thing. So we won't get into that because it tells you in the rule book to stop at 18. And all the rules about Saishin and Banzai and a lot of the other Japanese stuff is at the end of the rule book. So we're going to ignore that stuff for now. Straight up firefight, real simple. So they have 5. Now, because they are opportunity fire and it's not planned, they have to use their proficient firepower, which is a 3. So it's a 3, and then they also have, but they get a +4 because he's in the open and within 5 hexes. So if you're 4 hexes or less, you get a +4. If you're 5 hexes to 8, you get a +2. If you're over 8, you get a 0. So they're going to actually get a 7 here for suppressing this guy. So we're going to roll, and we get a 10, which means they didn't roll what they needed, and he can continue moving. And we put a used marker on here. And he can move again. Okay, so they're going to move here. Now let's fire at him again, and I'll show you what happens when you're suppressed and you try to do an action. So we're going to fire with this guy, which is a second line unit. So this actually is not going to work real well, but we're going to give it a shot anyway. So this is a second line unit, and we look here, and you can see that their firepower is a 4. Proficient is 2, melee is 2. The range is only 4, so I'll have to check the range, but I think the range is only 3, so they're good. But the morale is 10, but they're suppressed, so it's actually a 6. And then 3 would be, doubly suppressed. So we're going to put this guy back, and remember he's suppressed, so we'll put the suppressed marker back. Now he's going to have to take and I'll use the white die for the Japanese, because they give us 2 dice, so why not use the other one? So he needs to roll a 6 or lower to pass his morale check. He rolls a 4, so he passes the morale check. That allows him to fire. So his proficient firepower is a 2. The range is 3, so he's within the bonus of getting 4. So that gives him a 6. So we'll roll again, and he rolled a 7 and also misses. So now in addition to being suppressed, he's also used. Okay, so now this guy somehow has been dodging the bullets and is going to complete, or he's going to move. Now I can fire these other guys. And this guy now maybe should. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold off. And I'll explain why in a bit. But we're going to move this guy here. And then he's going to move in here, because he has movement of 5. Squads have movement of 5. I don't know if I mentioned that. And weapons teams have movement of 4. This was all clear. Sandbar for infantry, as far as moving, costs 1. Just the same as kind of like open terrain. So it's, 1, 2, 3, 4. He's good. He's in melee now, so we'll have a melee round. And I might not play this whole scenario because I don't want this to be super long and it's going to be kind of boring. And I just want to show you mechanically how this works. And hopefully I'm getting all this right. Because I sometimes forget stuff and get things wrong, but that's not the plan. So let me drop a used marker on here. So now I've used 3. So now do I want to move my other unit over? And yes, I do. So here we'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he can assault there, right? So this is why I waited. I'll show you why. We go 1. This guy could fire. If I wait a little longer, this guy could fire. Because once he comes here, he clears this jungle, and we have line of sight to that. So, but on the other hand, here's where you got to think about things if you're the Japanese player. This guy under here can move into this hex and assist with the melee. And we do have two unit activations we can use. So we'll have this unit hold off because I want to use this unit to move into here to assist in melee. I might do something similar with this guy, and because this one's plan is to get into melee here. So the Japanese don't necessarily know that, but this guy can't fire anywhere anyway because he's kind of in the back and he's got jungle in front of him. But this guy can fire. So as soon as we move here, he's going to fire. So we're going to remove our conceal marker. This is again a first line squad. So again, it's op fire, so they have to use the proficient firepower, which is a 3. They get a +4 for the moving fire. We'll roll. And he rolled a 10 again. This is unbelievable. So again, nothing. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as soon as we hear, we can do something called final op fire. Now, final op fire, it's similar to op fire, but it's done by units that have already been marked as used, which we have 2 of them, one here and one here. So, well, actually I have 3. We have 1 over here, but it has to be in the hex adjacent. Or you can spend a command point, which I didn't talk about, but you get one. Both sides have 1 command point. And the command points can be used for a variety of things, but one of those things is to allow final op fire for a unit at up to its normal range. So if we back this guy up, we can say, oh, I'm going to use my Japanese command point. So why not do that? Let's take my Japanese command point. We're going to use it. And I'm just going to put it off to the side over here so that I know I used it. And we're just going to do the same thing we just did. So we're going to fire again. So all this, it's the same modifiers, except there's a -2 modifier added on for, basically being final op fire. So we get the 3 plus 4 minus 2 is 7. Is 5, sorry. So they need a 5 or lower. And they get a 3. So now they're successful. And so now they get suppressed. This guy is used again. Now we have to roll a morale check for the American unit. And his morale in this case is a 6. So if we roll a 6 or lower, or if we fail the morale check, he has to stop and can do nothing else. He's just used. If not, he can actually continue his turn. So we're going to roll here, and we rolled a 1, so we passed the morale check. So we're going to move up. And now we can do another final op fire from here. So we're going to do that as well. Now, it's the same thing, except it's 4. It's 4 plus 2 plus 4 is 6, minus 2 is 4. So they need a 4. And they get a 2. So this is now fully suppressed. And they get back to being used. Now, I would do another morale check, and I need to roll a 1 or a 2, or his move stops here and he's used. And we rolled a 6, which is pretty much what I expected would happen. So he's now used, and he's also fully suppressed. So that would end the American turn, because we've used all 4. We've activated and used 4 units. We would now go to the Japanese side. So now the Japanese can activate units, and they have 2 units available. One of these is a decoy. So but they do have to activate 2. So we're just going to mark the decoy, which I guess is this guy. And I didn't realize that. See, I had forgotten which one it was. We'll just mark him used. Now, there are also solo rules, which I am not using, where you can kind of draw out of a cup and so on, but I'm not using those. So we're going to take this guy, and he's going to move. And he's going to go... Now, jungle movement costs 3, I believe. It also does not lose concealment if an enemy moves adjacent. Gets ambush benefit in melee. Allied mortars, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah. And 2.5 movement in New Britain, but we're on Guadalcanal here. So that's 3 of his 5. This is open, so that's 4. And now he can, actually he can't move in there. So he's going to stop here. He's adjacent to an American, so I'm going to leave him as being visible. And so now everybody's used, and we would move to the rout phase. So basically it says infantry units that are in difficult situations on the battlefield may sometimes flee or surrender. This is represented by the rout phase. The player that moves first in the scenario must complete his entire rout phase first. Infantry units and guns that meet any of the following conditions at the start of their part of the rout phase are subject to rout. They are in the same hex and location as an enemy unit. That's true here. They are adjacent to an enemy unit that is not in melee. That's true there. They are not in beneficial terrain and are within 5 hexes of an enemy unit not in melee, whose line of sight is not hindered. So that would actually be true of these 2 guys, because they're not in beneficial terrain because they didn't start back here. Set up mess up on my part. So I have to rout check all my guys for rout, because this guy here is not in melee. Even though it's a decoy, they don't know that. That's the key part, right? We don't know that that's, I mean, I know, but my American counters don't know, so to speak. All right, so the way this works is pretty simple. If you basically have to take a morale check. All right, so anyone who's a 10, which would be these guys, they're not going to rout. So infantry units and guns subject to rout must take a morale check. If you meet more than one of the criteria, you still only take 1. Oh, and a Japanese, we'll see the Japanese here in a second, but the Saishin will come into effect, so I may use that part just for this. So morale checks, I really only have to roll for this guy because he's not suppressed and he is. So he's probably going to end up routing unless I roll a 2. And I rolled a 5. So he's going to rout. So what happens when you rout? If the unit fails the morale check by a margin equal to or greater than their casualty rating, it is reduced. His casualty rating's a 4, that's a 5. If I had rolled a 6, we'd be in trouble. But it's not, so they have to retreat. So it has to move to a hex that will either give it a beneficial terrain modifier or that will place it outside the LOS of enemy units if possible. If the unit cannot reach such a hex, it must use all of its movement advancing toward such a hex. It can reach half hexes are playable, and this is a half hex, and it's jungle. So that's where he's going to route to. So he's going to route to there. So he's in beneficial terrain now, and that qualifies as a suitable location for routing, at least as far as I can tell. All right, so now we flip over, we do the Japanese. So they have the same thing. This guy is in melee, and he's not suppressed, so he'll have a morale of 10, can't rout. This guy, however, can, although they're not in the same hex as an enemy. They are not. They aren't. So they don't have to take a route check. So nobody on the Japanese side essentially has to take a route check. So once the route phase is over, you would move to the melee phase. So the melee phase is whenever an infantry unit occupies the same location as an enemy infantry unit or gun, they are considered in melee, even though melee combat is not resolved until after the rout phase. The player moving first in the scenario decides the order in which melees are resolved and must decide on command point usage and allocate casualties first. So let's go back to what the command points can do. So the command points allow you to do these things. Re-roll in any infantry morale check. The player moving second can perform an action with one unit or asset before the other player at the start of the turn. So the Japanese could have used theirs to go first with one unit. They didn't do that. For an infantry unit to conduct final op fire on a unit that's farther than 1 hex away, they use a command point. The Japanese did that, so we've already seen that. They can re-roll a melee combat roll. Only one command point per side may be spent this way. They can also increase infantry proficient firepower by 1 as long as it doesn't raise it above the normal firepower. And they can increase an unmounted infantry unit's movement points by 1. So you could basically move 6 movement points with a squad if you used it that way. But we're going to do melee combat, and I may use my command point since it's in my pocket, and you get it every turn. So the melee phase. So units with the subscripted firepower for melee use that, and the Japanese have a 3. The Americans do not. Okay. Otherwise, it uses its normal, so it'll be 4 for the Americans and 3 for the Japanese. Those are their melee firepower, essentially. So each squad, weapons team, and gun in melee rolls 2 dice with no modifier. So we're going to roll 2 dice. We'll roll first for the Americans. We rolled an 8 and a 1. So the 1 would be a hit, the 8 would not. There are no modifiers on these. Count each dice separately. For each result that is less than or equal to its melee firepower, 1 unit in that hex is reduced. So this guy gets reduced. So he's now reduced. Now we have to roll for the Japanese. They rolled a 10 and a 1, so the same thing. This guy gets reduced. So they're both reduced. Oh, you know what? Let's go back. Let's go back. And let's just say, and let me turn this around so their facing is correct. Facing does not matter in melee either, by the way. I'm going to spend my command point and re-roll since I only got 1 hit, and I'm going to hope to get 2, which is probably stupid, but let's do it anyway. Same thing. So it's going to end up being the same thing. I won't re-roll for the Japanese. So we end up with the same thing. Both of these guys end up used. I'll just put both on top. So that would be the end of it. Both sides make their attacks before casualties are taken. Flank bonus. There is a flank bonus for it if we had come in from like behind. Then there would be a flank bonus. There's also like an ambush thing as well with the Japanese. But we're not going to use that for this particular example because I didn't think about it in time and because it's in the back of the rule book with the Japanese rules. So we're just going to play that out. And so I think what I'm going to do now is just wrap it up. So you've seen pretty much everything that basic combat has to offer. You've seen opportunity fire. You've seen final opportunity fire. Another thing you could do is you could say, well, I want to put an op fire marker on here. And then if, you know, let me do it over here on the Americans. Let's put that there and say, this guy decided he needed to move. He moves here. He can now, because he's planned op fire, he can fire on that. And what that does is let you do op fire with your full firepower. So that we didn't see, but that is another example of how op fire works. So there are 3 flavors of op fire. So hopefully you got kind of the gist of how the basic infantry on infantry combat works. Um, I'll probably do training scenario number 2, King of the Hill, which will bring us into bring in hills, mortars, and Japanese grenade dispensers, which some people would call knee mortars. So they were just kind of the small mortar that most Japanese squads carried with them during the war, and the Marines absolutely hated them because they were basically miniature grenade launchers, or knee mortars, depending on who you ask. But those will be in the second training scenario. I'm going to kind of think about whether or not I want to do it. And if I don't, then we'll just move on to basically doing a real scenario. And we'll see how it goes. I do have other games I want to do as well, but I do love me some tactical games. And so, I'm real tempted because I have the whole series to do Screaming Eagles, Ghost Panzer, Texas Arrows, something from the Battle Pack. We could go whole hog here on Band of Brothers. But I think it was Ray, one of my viewers, suggested maybe doing kind of a tactical month and doing all the different games and kind of talking about them at the end with like a recommendation video recap of everything. And I might do that, and I might do it even with just like Pacific Theater ones, because I do have this. I have The Last 100 Yards, the Solomons, which is basically the same scenario as this. And there are obviously other games as well that have Pacific setups. Old School Tactical would be a third option. Advanced Squad Leader, they do have an ASL starter kit for the Japanese. So these are all things I'll consider. Feel free to make suggestions in the comments if you would like to. As always, I want to thank you for watching, and I appreciate the support, and would appreciate if you would consider liking, sharing, subscribing, etc., 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 that I say every single time, but it's true nonetheless. So until next time, my name is Joe. This has been Hexed Encountered, and happy gaming.